Hey friends, welcome back to Fantasy Wash. Today is going to be a progress report day, which I've never really done before. I started doing monthly wrap-ups when I started my channel, and then I kind of fell away from that, and TBRs and MBRs and all that fun lingo. But today we are going to be doing a progress report for how January of 2024 is going so far. Let's jump in. So historically, I tend to feel really burnt out in January. I feel like a lot of people feel this way because December is kind of crazy and there's just a lot going on and you kind of have to reset for the new year. So I thought I would be getting out a lot more videos than I actually have. I've been trying to, but I just honestly haven't had the energy or motivation to do that just yet. Hoping this will be the spark that reignites that for me, but we'll get to some channel updates in a little bit. But the beginning of this year has been really excellent for me in terms of reading, but there's also been some interesting developments that I'm going to talk about as well. But I have so far completed several books and a few manga, and I've DNF'd for the first time 2 books, which has been a really interesting experience for me, and I'm currently in the process of reading several more. So I want to give a breakdown of what I've read, kind of an overall opinion of what I thought about it, if I think you should read it, and then talk about the books I've DNF'd, what I've been reading currently, or what I am reading currently, and then some channel announcements and some channel updates. So let's jump into all the books that I've read so far. So my year began with finishing the novella Dawn Shard by Brandon Sanderson. This was one of my last Cosmere reads. It was actually my last Cosmere read, now that I'm looking on it. I still have Sunlit Man to go, but I started it and I just wasn't feeling it at the time, so I'm going to get back to it. But Dawn Shard, I had a hit or miss relationship with, given the time and the story and the POV that we were dealing with. Dawn Shard is a novella that takes place between books 3 and 4 of the Stormlight Archive, and I have been hit or miss in general with Sanderson's novellas. I absolutely adored Emperor's Soul, which I read last year, but I didn't love Edge Dancer, like, at all. And then I was not super into this. I was sort of into some of the short stories that were in Arcanum Unbounded, but really, I don't love the novellas. So that might be an unpopular opinion. I also wasn't crazy about some of the characters that were in this book, but it definitely gave us really big Cosmere information and implications, was kind of frustrating in the sense that it wasn't incorporated into a book, because also this isn't technically a novella. It's over 50,000 words. I think the exact number was like 56,000 something. I'll try to figure out what the exact number is and maybe put it up here. But this was a longer read than I was anticipating, especially for a side story that gave us the amount of important information that we got. I didn't love the format that he did it in, so it wasn't a great start to my year, but I was happy to get the Cosmere information, so that part was good. I read a ton of Sanderson last year, as most of you know. This was, I think, my 24th Cosmere book in just over a year. So it was a lot of books, and it was kind of a bummer to end it on this one. I would recommend, if you are reading the Cosmere, don't end on Dawn Shard. But for some people, I know that they really loved it. It just wasn't really a hit for me. The second book that I read was Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. I was talking about in the books that I was most excited to read this year. I was getting back into the Joe Abercrombie universe, the First Law universe, and I really enjoyed this book. Best Served Cold so far has been my least favorite out of all the Abercrombie books that I've read. I read the original trilogy last year. I actually started Best Served Cold last year. I wasn't really feeling with it. Came back to it, finished it at the beginning of this year. A high point for me is the narration on this series. Stephen Pacey does such a great job, and I really feel like I enjoyed this book as much as I did because of his narration. It was interesting because my husband also read it, and he did not like this book anywhere near as much as me, and I'm wondering if it's because Stephen Pacey just brings the book to life so much and he didn't experience it in that way. I will say that I do think this is not Joe's strongest case for writing. I felt like The story fell flat in a lot of ways for our female character, Monza. It's a story of revenge, and it's interesting because you never really understand what people are doing. Anytime you think you figured someone out, they've gone and they've done something else. So it was fun in that way. It was kind of a cat and mouse situation in that when you think someone's going to go left, they go right. And I enjoyed that. The characters in this book, for the most part, were very enjoyable. A lot of them were characters that we've seen in the First Law universe before, and I enjoyed seeing them again. But it wasn't the strongest for me of Abercrombie's writing. I still gave the book, I think, a 4 out of 5 stars. So really enjoyed it, but wasn't my favorite Abercrombie. But my third book I read this year was The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie, and this book is a 5-star read. I loved this book from the beginning to the end, which is interesting because I've been doing a live piece, let's try that again. I have been doing One Piece live action discussions with my good friend Chris Navo on his channel. And one of the things that's come up for me a lot is I'm really not into prolonged fight scenes. And this book is 72 hours of fighting. But this is where Abercrombie shines because he's such a character-driven writer, and you really get to know the characters of this book. You get immersed in the world, you get in their head. I loved this story. So many of these character names are ones that are familiar from the original trilogy. There is a character that became very prominent in Best Served Cold that is also in this story. It was just fun to go back to the north, to go back to England. I loved seeing what happened to some of the characters. It's been 8 years since the end of Last Argument of Kings, and it was just such a fun book. The character work in this book, Gorst, was phenomenal. I thought he was so well written. I just thought he was so funny. He was kind of Glocta-esque for me in this book, and if you know me, if you've been watching, I really love Glocta, so I definitely enjoyed getting into the mind of Gorst. I thought it was so, so clever. Abercrombie is so witty, and it's just so apparent with how he does inner monologues. I think he's a master at it. I wish everyone could write inner monologues like him because they're so special. I loved this book. Definitely recommend The Heroes. You cannot read The Heroes, though, unless you've read Best Served Cold. And I feel like you probably shouldn't read those unless you've read the original trilogy. So please go out, do yourself a favor, read all of Joe Abercrombie stuff because it's great. The next book that I read was a reread, and it was Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I announced on my channel that I am doing a buddy read with Kyle from Read by Kyle. I love Warbreaker. I loved it on the reread. It is such a fun story. I have an early video from my channel where I talked about Warbreaker. I'm going to link that just so we can see how long my hair has gotten since that video and how my background has changed. Hopefully I've gotten a little better at this, but maybe not. Who knows? You guys can let me know if you watch both. But I think Warbreaker is, again, just one of these books that is very special. Sanderson wrote this book on his honeymoon, which is hilarious when you really get into the content of the book. But the story for me is a story of twos. You have 2 cities, you have 2 sisters, you have 2 religions, and it gets into the nitty-gritty of relationships, of people, of sex, of violence, of God, of faith, of lack of faith. It just is a really interesting character study. I think this book has some of the best Cosmere characters. Lightsong and Nightblood in particular are 2 of my favorites. It's interesting too because the further you get into the Cosmere, you see that there are very big implications from this book, and that there are world hoppers that are in this book that then go out into the greater Cosmere. I loved returning to this world. I was a bit worried that I might not have the same affinity for it that I did the first time. And guys, don't worry, I did. It's still so great. The humor hits all the right notes in this book. I think that the magic system is so interesting. It's detailed. It's just one that you read it and you go, yeah, that makes sense. But also it's super complicated, so it doesn't make sense. It's just classic Sanderson. I like this book in that it doesn't have your typical Sanderlanche at the end. I feel like Lightsong's story arc is delightful. Nightblood's arc is fantastic. Ciri's relationship is so well written. It's one of my only favorite relationships in fantasy. I don't really like romance in fantasy, and this is one of the few times that I genuinely do like it. I love Warbreaker. I'm not going to say too much more about it because Kyle and I are going to be having a chat about it on the channel. There were also others that read it with us in my Discord, which is linked below. Some of those were Rob by Punk Rock Cereal Bowl. We have Caleb from Celebrity and Ben from Books with Genghis Khan. So I think that everyone will be kind of joining us in the comments for our live chat. If you still want to read Warbreaker and join us, you definitely can. Just hop into the Discord and hop into the little sub channel about Warbreaker. My next 3 reads were manga, and they were all Sailor Moon. So I have been reading my way through Sailor Moon. They have been re-releasing Sailor Moon in these editions called the Pretty Guardian editions. I think they're gorgeous, so I'm super excited to have them. I did realize afterwards, though, that there is possibly a nicer looking edition out, but it's more expensive, so I'm hit or miss as to whether or not I made the right choice, but I've still been really enjoying the story. I am now waiting for the next volume to be released, which is going to be released, I think, at the end of this week. I think maybe on the 28th. And then the next and possibly final one is going to be released in March. So it's been fun to re-experience Sailor Moon because I grew up with Sailor Moon, and I actually then was prompted to go out and buy the anime that I grew up with because the version I watched growing up is not available on the internet. I looked, and you have to go into the National Archive and find odd episodes one at a time. I saw the DIC dubbed version growing up as a child, and I loved it. Put it on order. It arrived. I've got all the DVDs now. I'm super jazzed about it, but it's such a fun nostalgia read for me. If I didn't have the connection that I did to it from my childhood, I probably wouldn't be raving about it the way that I am. But because that emotional connection is there, it's definitely one that I get super excited for and have really enjoyed re-immersing myself in this world, especially because I never read the manga. I just watched the anime. So it's interesting to see how they differ and how they are the same. The final book that I have read so far in the month of January was another reread, and it was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I read the Mina Lima edition that I was gifted for Christmas, which was such a beautiful edition. I really enjoyed reading it. It's also just super fun to get back into that world. I always love returning to the wizarding world. I love Harry Potter. Grew up with it. I was the right age group, so it hits all the right notes for me. It's just one that I know I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm possibly going to pick up new things every time that I read it, so that's always super fun. It's also a really nice palate cleanser because the language and prose is easy. It's a middle grade book, at least when they start. So you don't have to worry about, taking notes or anything like that. I don't take notes, but I know some people do when they read. But it's been really fun to reread it. I'm planning on rereading probably all of them this year. This is going to be a year of rereads for me, as I've already reread 2 books in January. And I'm already wanting to reread The Heroes because it was so good. So the 2 books that I DNF'd, which was a first for me, I was a classic non-DNFer. I thought, well, maybe a book will get good and I need to stick it out, were I, Claudius and Godkiller. These 2 books were just not for me. I got about 30 to 40, I think it was 40% through I, Claudius, and it just was not jiving with me. I think John Williams probably ruined this for me with my read of Augustus last year, because Augustus is just hands down the best historical fiction that I've ever read. I've praised about Augustus endlessly on this channel. Please read it if you like historical fiction. Even if you don't, it's so, so good. Everyone should read Augustus. And then with Godkiller, I got about 20% of the way in. I didn't like the prose. I didn't like the story. It just did not pull me in. It was a story that could have been really interesting, I feel like. It just didn't hit the right notes for me. I know a lot of other people have really loved it, and that's great, and I'm excited for them, but I'm giving myself some permission this year to finally start DNFing things if it's not jiving with me, and I'll find something that I really do want to read instead. Now, the books that I am currently reading, I am reading The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell, which was recommended to me by Jimmy Nuts of the Fantasy Network. When I did a Chatting with Nuts with him, he said he thought I would like it. I'm buddy reading that with Joanna from Joanna Reads, and it's been interesting. I knew nothing about this book going in. I am very early days with this book. I just started it yesterday. It is weird, and I'm curious to see where it goes. Don't tell me in the comments if you've like any spoilers, but if you've read it, let me know what you ended up thinking about it. I am also in the midst of reading Red Country by Joe Abercrombie so that I can finish these standalones because I want to get to the Edge of Madness trilogy. And I am reading the Gentleman Bastards book number 1, The Lies of Locke Lamora. And all of them so far have been really enjoyable. I'm having a great time with reading right now. Really, it's been a good month. So despite having lack of energy in terms of filming content, I've had a really good month in terms of actually sitting down and reading and absorbing really fun material. Now, a couple of little channel things that I wanted to mention. I said earlier, I am dealing with extreme fatigue, and this for me is not an unusual thing. This is a medical thing for me, so I'm going to get treatment for that on Friday. I'm hoping that that will kind of reignite my spark for content coming up really soon, so that'll be really great. I've also got a couple of love bomb chats coming up that I'm really excited for. I have had wonderful people on for my love bomb chats. Honestly, every single one has been so great so far. I've had Ben on from Books with Genghis Khan, Joanna from Joanna Reads. I've had Jimmy from the Fantasy Network, and Tori from Tori Talks. And coming up, I've got Bookborn from the channel Bookborn, and I've got Murphy Napier from Murphy Napier. These are some of the people that make BookTube a really wonderful place. They offer great insight, great reviews, great video essays. So I'm super excited to have these chats with them because a year ago, I would not have been thinking that this is going to be a thing for me that I get to do. My channel is now a year old. I celebrated my BookTube birthday at the beginning of the month. I didn't do a video for it or anything like that. I kind of just did a little community tab notice, but I wanted to let each of you know that I so appreciate you hanging out with me and sharing your time with me because I know how valuable time is, and I love the community that I've gotten in BookTube. It's just been so wonderful to find people that are wanting to communicate about books, tell you what they love, give you recommendations. It's been really fun to have people get to know what I like over the course of the last year and give me recommendations or tell me, hey, maybe you might not love that. Either way, I've loved it. I've loved that I've gotten to know some of you on a personal level. If you want to come hang out and get to know each other better, you can do that in the Discord that's linked below. But really, I just appreciate you, and I'm super happy that you're here. What have you been reading in the month of January? I want to know, how's your progress report going? I don't know if I'll ever do a progress report again. You can let me know if this is something that you liked. If it is, then maybe I will continue to do it. Something that I've been kind of toying around with doing, and you can let me know as well, is a series called Books and Ballads, in which I talk about the books that I've read and songs that I think remind me of these books because I love music and I love literature. So they kind of go hand in hand for me. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, you can find me at Fantasy Awash. As always, if you like this content, you can hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye. With the Stormlight Archive. Dawnchart is a novella that takes place between books 3 and 4 of the Stormlight Archive. Why can't you say it?